Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's the first night after the new moon, and I'm taking a walk under the star field in a strange and lonely city. But the sky is beautiful. Truly astonishing. What is the sky? Take a moment and ask yourself what you think the sky is. If where you are it's dark and you go and look at the sky, what do you imagine or think it is that you're seeing up there? But if we're going to be conceptual, we need a few other ingredients. Not just what is the sky, but what is it doing? What is it being? Who is the sky? Where is the sky? Why is the sky? How is the sky? What is the sky? We have these 7 question words in English, and these words are the origin of actual quests. Not merely question and answer, but quests. The quest to understand, for example, what is the sky? And this particular question has a crucial importance in the structure of human cognition, a very special importance. It's one of the root elements that all other elements inherit qualities from, and fail to inherit qualities from, depending on how crude our answers are or how monodimensional. What is the sky? Now, we must understand that however we answer, what we're answering with are tokens, verbal tokens, category tokens, nouns, adjectives. And that perspective, that form of structuring our minds when we do this, which we are so familiar with we don't even think we're doing it, but we do. That's a representational layer. That layer is composed and refers to representations. Composed of and refers to. And it's an artifact. It's a library of artifacts, but they're all the artifacts of a strange ability our species found a way to survive the acquisition of. The ability to form a layer of thought, behavior, perception, and utilization that's outside of nature, an artifact layer. Yeah? And when I say outside of nature, there are different definitions of natural we might propose. One of them is that everything that is, nature is what is. Everything that is, therefore, is natural. And I'm going to skip over supernatural here, at least for the moment. But the other definition of natural is that which is in harmony with its environment in such a way that it produces pretty much endlessly new forms of life, of time, of light, of being, of mind. What is the right word? The nature of the universe is to produce stars and worlds and minds. And we know this as a fact because it does so here. As if the earth is a crystallization of certain qualities in time-space that it cannot be other than. You see? Earth doesn't have precedence. Time-space has precedence here. Time-space doesn't come from the earth, right? The earth comes from time-space. So just in the same way a woman bears a human child, a universe bears a living planet. And that planet is the child of the universe. There's no way around this. The forces, light, time, electricity, chemistry, biology, all of these things are repercussions of the nature of the universe. They don't start here on Earth. They start up there. And so the Earth can be understood as a strange sort of living crystal, a relatively explicit, physically explicit instance of the nature of time-space, i.e., the sky. So in this sense, anything that becomes so catastrophically confused that it attacks its own origin, the history and future of life on Earth, because everything that's alive right now is the living history of life on Earth. We harm that, we harm the entire history of life on Earth. And itself, any creature so boldly confused as to attempt something like this and then succeed and then find new ways to do this every minute, every second, that's not natural. That's not in harmony with time-space or the world or life itself or intelligence, awareness. That's a monster. That's a real monster, a true monster. A monster in the sense that it will eat everything, including itself, unless somehow its course is changed, or it becomes intelligent, or something in the equation of the complex tangle of causes that produced the problem of Homo sapiens on Earth. Somewhere in there is medicine. In the same way that something drew our species into this representational behavior, where things and beings are treated as if they are virtual objects in a space that's more important than life, relation, intelligence, survival, fulfillment, joy, adoration, wonder, awe. There's something more important than all of those deeply intrinsic urges and hungers and thirsts in us. And what's more important than that is representations. That strange space that the humans have created over time between themselves and nature, as if they were in what they imagine outer space to be. Yeah. In our houses, in our cars, in our computers, we almost perfectly evict nature. The bacteria, they get in there. Some insects, and the occasional quote-unquote pest. So we've evicted the animal we are and all of its histories and faculties and urgencies and dreams to exist in what? A physical experience of isolation from nature and each other, isolation from our interiority, our most urgently held ideals and dreams and hopes. And we drive cars and live in houses and watch TV and look at our smartphones, and of course there's some other things in there for most of us, hopefully, but fewer and fewer over the past few years for sure, for a number of reasons. But we live in a representational layer. You have your little cards and such which represent wealth, or your pieces of paper or your gold bars, and those represent value. Value ambiguized by commerce, value rendered ambiguous, right? It's not a specific form of value, but it should be equivalent to any kind of value, pretty much. If you have gold or diamonds, So you can see that money is one of the signs of the transformation in our species, where we evacuated ourselves from nature into representations. So I want to give you a more concrete example. A friend of mine has a dog. And I dreamt about this dog, I think, the day before I met him, which I consider to be unusual and significant. In any case, he loves the dog, and it's a young dog, and it's very effervescent and spunky, and it runs all over the place, and he doesn't keep it on a leash. But at night, this little dog chases cars in a very dangerous way, not in a way where the dog's going to get killed by a car if this continues, most likely. And my friend says, I just love the fact that he's at liberty. I don't want to take his liberty from him and put him on a string, and I know it might cost him his life. And I understand my friend's position. I'm not entirely saying it's wrong, but there's a problem here, and the problem is we live outside of nature in a representation where everything's paved for the convenience of people who drive cars, and we might even say for the propagation of cars themselves. The dog is in active sensing. It doesn't have the concept car equals death. It's never been injured by a car. It just thinks those are fun things to chase. Right? And so you can see here a beautiful example of what's happening to us. We're getting hit by the car of representational cognition 12 times a minute, and we can't even tell it's hurting us. as animals. But there's another feature of the story that I think is important, which is he lives in the representational layer of animals and beings and plants on Earth, right? The layer that humans composed, built, and sustained. He lives in that layer. He drives a car, has a bank account, owns a home, lots of little cards and numbers and things that identify him in the representational layer, his driver's license, and so on. That layer is completely fictional, entirely fictional. And almost all of the tokens that we use to talk about things in this layer, completely fictional. They are made up ideas that have nearly nothing to do with whatever the sky is, or what the world is, or what animals and plants are, what we are. They have to do with departing that. They have to do with cutting that off and throwing it away. They have to do with evicting that. All of that. Our true nature as beings, our hearts, our souls, our purpose in being born, or the purpose of nature of our birth, our chance to know as human beings while alive in a physical body the transcendentally impossible intelligence of the planet we live on, the creatures who live here, and the sky itself. And not the intelligence, the intelligences, the symphony of intelligence that is the universe. What is the sky? It's not what humans are doing. And what the humans are doing is not natural. It's catastrophically misguided in ways that don't merely if there was an extremely advanced alien species that could look at a living planet and unpack its history from its current position, perhaps because they could sense time, the quality and character of time, which is something we don't even think about as humans, or at least we generally don't. So if there was a species like this and they could look at Earth, they would see that there had been a terrible accident in evolution here. One of the animals got representational cognition, developed it, or who knows exactly how it happened. Contact with angels, maybe contact with aliens, maybe both and more. Contact with the biorelational hyperstructure that is Earth and the sky, for sure. That's true. Yeah, they went mad. And the reason they would know we went mad is because the creation of machines changes the local quality and character of time itself. I have to pause here, otherwise I'll fall off the cliff of trying to explain why this is true, and that's not where I want to go. So we humans have developed, or actually, developed is kind of the wrong word, or if I use this word, we should think of it in the same way that we mean when we say someone develops cancer. The humans became vulnerable to a broad array of what we could think of as cognitive exploits. And this happened as they fell down the ladder from dreaming and deep and true relation into thinking and ever more explicit and utilitarian concepts of identity. What things are, who people are, who beings are, what can be a who and what can't, so on and so forth. In a representational system, identity is effectively equivalent to tokens, words. If I say tree, we think, usually, of a distinct, recognizable, vegetal organism, if we even think of it as an organism. You know, we may think of it so trivially that we just think tree, on to the next thing. But if we actually ask ourselves, you know, what is the tree? What is it doing? What is it being? Who is the tree? Where is the tree? How is the tree? You know, if we come from each of the angles, and we want not to end this process with a token, but with insight. That's a quest. Especially if we keep doing that instead of the thing of, oh, there's a tree, oh, there's a tree, oh, there's a tree, next, 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 right? Or not even, oh, there's a tree. We could just be driving down the street, lined with trees, no awareness of that there are trees there. What I want to highlight is that in the outer space of human representational cognition, beings are converted to objects, and objects are converted to numbers. Beings are converted to money, living places to money. Right? That money is converted to objects, and so on. It's dead terrain for organisms. And in order to sustain anything like that, our species has to be killing up damn near everything on Earth at all times, 24/7, at ever increasing intensity and in new ways per day. So in a sense, we're killing the relational superposition of the organisms of life on Earth by tearing out its roots one by one and stressing them and poisoning them and fucking every other kind of thing. Now, the we that I was using, I just mean the activity of our species as a whole, and particularly the activity of the collectives we think of as nations and corporations and businesses and things like this. Courtrooms, jails, the military, and so on. All of these farces. All of those farces are completely representational. They're fictions that will eat our lives and the world. They have no remorse. They are not beings. They don't think. They're just processes that our species has collapsed into synchronization with. And so in a sense, we have become these processes. The dog doesn't have the representation car equals death. The human who watches over the dog does. Therefore, in this case, it seems to me incumbent upon the human to protect the dog in the same way we would protect a child who didn't understand that the things in the street will kill you. They don't think, they're not rational. They do a thing that no animal ever did on Earth, which is just run into everything it possibly could. If it was in its path, it runs it over. That's a great image of the dark aspect of representational cognition. And of course, it's not all dark. There's beauty in there. That's not the point. If the dark part is going to rip our lives and world apart and damage time, space itself, and things like this, we need to take a look in that direction first. The beauty we can acknowledge and come back to later. The representational space is a space familiar to one of the minor faculties of our human minds and intelligences. And it is a faculty that likes to grasp things, but it grasps them in language or concept. And in this way, it is evicted from relationship. It doesn't want any of that. It wants to know the name or manipulation that produces a good result of some representation. It lives in a world that's entirely invented out of the category tree and the root concept, which is the universe, and then the subcategories: plant, animal, valuable, garbage, good, bad, beautiful, ugly, tasty, disgusting. It knows only by how the tokens relate in its lexicon to each other, and by the nature of the category tree and what's included in that and what's excluded. That's its entire dimension of knowledge, which literally has almost zero to do with being a living intelligence, being a human being. So there's a schism between all the aspects of ourselves that know what I'm saying to be true and are the medicine for that problem, and the rather desperate impotent little, what is it? Well, it might be thought of as an array of faculties that form a unity, and the unity has all kinds of dangerous qualities. Totally happy to lie if it can say it in language, totally happy to field threats against the entire universe or the sun or all humans or everything. It's like a rage-filled jungle of anciently originating and long evolved aspects of anger. It's as if there's a simulated self, and it only deals with representations and words and concepts and categories. And it's furiously angry that there's anything else that can even exist at all. Nothing else should exist. And the reason it's furiously angry is complex. It's been divided from its own origin and the faculties to which it ordinarily harmonizes. Yeah? And so it's become tyrannical and terrified, and that thing will kill everything. The fascinating discovery to me was just the idea, and I'm not saying any of these things are facts. I'm saying that they're very useful ways of looking at stuff if we want insight rather than answers, if we want to keep the question alive rather than snuff it out. And I strongly suggest the former. In the layer of representational cognition, the latter reigns supreme. What's that? Oh, it's a tree. Done. No more questions. What's that? Oh, it's a car. Done. Not why are there cars? What the hell are those? What are humans doing? I mean, what they're doing is bizarrely, catastrophically weird, right? Paving the planet for cars? Come on. No intelligent species would go like, hey, let's pave the planet and make billions of cars and fight wars about it. Nobody decided that. The humans aren't deciding anything. This is the problem. The structure of the long evolved habits in the representational layer of human activity and thought and behavior and purpose right? There's no one at the wheel of the car. There's nothing there. It's just the collapse, the ever-collapsing, more and more artifacted, more tokenized result of absolutely departing from nature, intelligence, relation, life on Earth. My friend Ryan and I often talk a bit about whether animals are representational or not. And he's a little bit more on the side that they are. And I agree that there are degrees of representational ability and behavior in various animals, for sure. Not even maybe. But I don't think they're formally representational the way we are. They don't disappear into outer space in a world of tokens and categories, and a wildly incomplete world of tokens and categories, right? Missing the most important categories completely. They're not even in the tree, right? Because the root element was compromised. What the sky is. That's the root element. Compromise that, all the categories inherit, in the representational layer, they all inherit this problem. And they ramify it and exaggerate it and all kinds of crazy things. Of course, only in human minds. In the 70s, there were a lot of films about space travel, and most of them depicted spacecraft that were like laboratory environments and or medical theaters, surgery theaters. Zero life in the spaceship. It's a very strange idea. No intelligent species would think that way. But of course, really intelligent species wouldn't even be thinking about spaceships. There's much better ways to do those things than physical technologies. And most of the creatures that develop physical technologies, well, let's just say it doesn't go well for them. Relational technologies, those, see, that's the polarity to it's not really a problem, actually it's not what I want to say. There are many different modes of representational cognition, and there's ways that animals like us could employ it that are beautiful and mostly work pretty well and are trustworthy. We're not using those. Those are off the table. And part of the reason is that we're not choosing. Our species isn't choosing this. And so if we blame our species, there's a problem there, because they're certainly not choosing it. They're born into a pre-compromised context in which they will be socialized in language, enculturated in the anciently evolved mess that we inherit when we're born in the modern world. So almost all of that is, almost all the representational stuff you do, most of it anyway, is inherited. There's something I want to highlight though. If we make a sphere and we divide it into 3 segments, right? Core, second layer, third layer. And at the surface of the third layer, we put representational cognition, what humans do. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff underneath that that's semi-representational. And then it becomes very blurry, and it's not representational in the second layer. But at its origin, which I placed at the middle of the sphere here, it is truly and staggeringly transcendental. It has nothing to do with words or ideas or concepts or language or models or math or physics, biology. And yet all of these things that it has nothing to do with emerge from it. And so too the problem of our representational catastrophe, the rolling catastrophe that we're experiencing and probably mostly extremely confused by. You see, our hearts and souls can't live in that layer. It's a desert of a very deadly kind. They can't live in those representations of the nation and society and the bank and the rent and the car and the dog, house payment and the insurance and the cable, the internet, smartphones. There's no place for life there. That's the outer space. It's the lifeless laboratory that is the ideal of the strange persona within the collective of our species that keeps chasing this is the really weird thing, emancipation from nature. It wants sovereignty over nature, this persona in our species. And it believes that sovereignty means evacuation. No nature here. We got this. We can do all this with machines. We don't need nature. It's hilarious because at the very least, nature is the origin and moment-to-moment necessary fuel for the possibility of a mind at all. And so all of the possibilities of minds emerge from nature. You want to evict that? Good luck having a mind. You think you're intelligent when you're not surrounded by billions of forms of life doing trillions of things per second? That outer space is lethal. And the farther we travel into it, the more desperate the devastation it produces in our hearts and intelligences and creativity and all of these things. There's a carrying cost for the representational layer, and it gets more expensive per second. No animal could survive it. An animal, if it has to stop and think about things, it must have a great degree of luxury at that moment. In the world of animals and insects, one instant of slight indecision and you're food. You'll be killed. And that means that you could understand the animals and insects as a strange experiment where facing tens of threats per second throughout their lives and dying and reproducing and so on and evolving and passing on their genes and all of this, they became a symphony of living, embodied, physical intelligences. They don't think. Their bodies are made of the intelligence of billions and billions of life years of their ancestors. Yeah. Not a few, not 100, not 1,000,000, not a few million. Hundreds of billions of life years of ancestors. Selecting the survivors of moment-to-moment encounters with threats and danger and predators and injury and sickness and so on. So what you have when you're looking at a housefly is an example of one of the most highly evolved physical intelligences on Earth. That thing is old in ways that make octopuses look young. I'll have more to say about this in a minute. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, I have no idea what the number is. But let's say that there are, if we include all the different kinds of flies, I don't know, 500 billion flies per year. Right? So, let's say flies are 2.7, let's see, the Earth's 4.3, life's about 3. Let's say they're 1.7 billion years old. I think this is a very conservative estimate. So that would mean that there have lived on Earth 1.7 billion times 500 billion flies in a relatively coherent and mostly consistent environment. When you get to run that many experiments, you get some unimaginably highly adapted physical intelligences. Why does the sky produce those? Right? Why does the sky produce those as its children here? If you look from the representational side, or from what we might think of as the disembodied, disconnected, left hemispheric-like aspect of consciousness, flies have no utility, therefore they have no value, therefore they are just objects to be disposed of at will. So in the representational layer, the relationship with identity is missing. What has been substituted for it is a series of categorical declarations. Insect, not useful, probably harmful, destroy. Just as if a machine were running a program. Right? In dreaming, in the other mode of consciousness, and of course there are many modes, not two, even objects acquire qualities, dimensions of character and meaningful identity that are never formalized, but they are experienced. We don't have a language to formalize the experiences of dreaming. And when we use waking language, it fails. Though we can tell the plot and the scenes, and we could tell our feelings and senses and memories. Perhaps, if we're lucky. We need both faculties, and they must be in harmony for our awareness to become something like its nature, its purposive origin. When I think of the tree, I might think three ways at the same time, like the three positions in the sphere. At the core, transcendental, unknowable, impossible to the waking mind's ideas, impossible to those ideas. The waking mind would never allow a thing like an actual tree to intrude on its tyrannical grasp of categories and tokens. Anything that has some ambiguity outside that is a danger to the representational paradigm, or specifically to what we might think is, we'll call it the right side collapse, meaning the right hand in this case. Left hand dreaming. All kinds of things in between them, and all kinds of different ways for them to relate, endless kinds. But when the right hand dominates, graspable tokens, concepts, and categories are the demand. There's a vast history behind all this, but the doorways appear when we become aware. We have the insight, not merely the words, right, that the transcendental tree is the actual tree. Then there's the ambiguous phase of the sphere, where it could be many different things depending on how and why we're looking at it. And then we have the representational, the more representational, outer layer of the sphere, where, no, of course that's a tree. And then the very surface, which is really tokenized, just tree, wood comes from it, that's basically it, sometimes fruit. So you can see that we want to dwell not in the outer layer. We can be aware of the outer layer, and we can learn to do this together. And we are learning now. I am learning with you. We can remember that the outer layer is uninhabitable and almost a pure fiction. It's a fiction of departure from the actual experience of identity and relation and the meaningful dimensionality that's available to us in this, that we are reminded of by the astonishing beauty and strange angles of emotional and relational intensity, right, that are natural to dreaming. The mailbox in a dream is never just a mailbox, ever. Right? The flower in the dream is not the flower. It's a flower and 5 or 6 other feeling tones and felt senses and things like this. So one of the consequences of severe formal representational cognition is that all of this is lost. It is evicted to the dreaming life and thought of to be native to that, and that is mostly dismissed, right? Because that's a bunch of spooky whatever. Who cares what it is? It's not real. Right? What's real to the representational cognitive is categories. Right? It's a tree, it's a plant, it's money, it's not, it's a drug, it's a car, it's a house. Object categories and value categories. And other things. Vigilance categories, for example. What do I have to watch? What do I like to watch? Who's watching me? How are they watching me? All these things. So the representational layer should be the servant of something vastly wiser and more relationally intelligent, but instead, having been divided from its origin, what we might think of as its natural prodigy, its best place to be, its best role. Deprived of that, it becomes terrified and impotent and paranoid and evacuative, dissociated. Thousands of stories about this in the ancient religions. Cain and Abel is a simple, near at hand one. So when I look at the tree, obviously I live in the representational layer too, and it's very compelling. It has incredible gravity. It draws our awareness and attention to it at the expense of everything else. It's very, very trenchant. So I'm walking down the street and on paved sidewalk looking at cars and houses and light poles and things. And I'm in the representational layer. But I am aware that the tree is a beautiful and terrifying mystery beyond all comprehension, beyond all representation, entirely. And then I'm also aware that the tree is, like all things, entirely transcendental. It's not a tree. I don't know what that is. It's beyond any possible conception. In the second layer of the sphere of identity, I imagine beautiful things about the tree, and I know that some of them are not merely plausible, right? That the tree is connected to all trees in all of time, that they form a network of intelligences, and they're physical intelligences, and they're accessible to us as human beings. Our own cognition has more to do with trees than almost anything else we can. There's no better metaphor. You can use the cloud metaphor, but the tree metaphor is much more natural. Our category, our lexicons are trees. And the thing I think no one's ever properly understood is that those trees have trunks and the trunks have roots. And those roots are holophores. Yeah. And there's a single root, which is the uniphore. A holophore is a root concept for humans in the representational lexicon that informs all other concepts. Some root concepts, and there's not a specific catalog of them, are friend, dream, food, mother, time, hand, eye, animal, plant. Whatever you think these are, and whatever you think they aren't, informs all other concepts. World is more fundamental. What is the world? Whatever you think of that, concepts can only inherit the expanse of what you think of that. How you think about what is the world. Fundamentally, what is its nature? What is its truest or more true? What is it doing? Who is that? Why is the world? How is the world? All of these things. Yeah. So, these root concepts over time, they underwent cycles of degradation until they became extremely one-dimensional or two-dimensional. And I call this process artifacting. And that's one of the consequences of the particular path in representational cognition our species has thus far taken. Overall, at the broad scale. There are all kinds of astonishing innovations within the broad scale. It's not only darkness, but it's mostly darkness. There's all kinds of little branches in the jungle of human cognition and thought and awareness and practice and so on that are very deep and rich and alive and, frankly, mostly trustworthy. But the darkness pervades the overall context. Those branches are relatively rare. And we have to compose them and enact them together for them to exist. So what about this transcendentalness? At the core Oh, yes, I should continue on the holophore tree. So underneath the holophores, the root idea is: what is the world? What is a friend? What is a mother? What is food? What is a dream? All of these things have an upscale origin. And that origin is the uniphore. What is everything? And religion attacks that uniphore and attempts to capture it and tell you what everything is and is for. And that's the kind of gambit that you'd expect in a formally representational animal like us. And it works really, really well. It's an exploit. There may or may not be divine beings. Personally, I know there are. Or at least I know that, how would I put this? If you go from the outskirts of the sphere, pure representation, toward the center, at some place, probably in the third and second layer, you will see there are divine beings. If you go further toward the center, the idea of beings is gone, and there's the direct experience of the transcendental, or the enactment of it. At that point, no concepts will help you. So it depends on what layer of the sphere we're in, so to speak, the sphere of representation, whether there are divine beings or not. Yeah. And what I promise you it turns out to be is that the question is irrelevant. As you travel toward origin itself, whatever transcendental explosion of ecstasy and awe and terrifying beauty that is, there's no concept survive in there. The whole representational layer is gone. You can forget about that shit. But we live, most of us, near the surface, and occasionally we travel back toward the core of the sphere, between being and representation. And what I would love is if we could all travel together back toward being, in ways that we could trust and were authentic and true. Because this is what we fundamentally hunger for. In all the things we seek, we hunger for this. But we don't know of this, most of us, and it's very difficult to do it by oneself. Yet it is happening here for a moment together. If we could travel and thus reforge our minds by, like the whale, we can take a breath of representation if we need to and dive down to the deepest waters beyond it and then see how it is reflected there and how we reflect upon it from those depths, and then return if we need to representations, or even the other way around. We can breathe the oxygen of dreaming and dive down into the representation and shine the light of dreaming in the dead world of tokens and artifacts. And surely our intelligence will awaken. Our awareness will awaken. Our creativity will awaken. Our power will become whole again. This is my dream. This is my dream. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.